Hello, and welcome to the eTech podcast with me, your host, Ryan Maughan. I have been involved in the development of electrified vehicles and machines since 2005 as an engineer and a business leader. This podcast is the product of my passion for electric and autonomous vehicle technology. I'm here to share knowledge from some of the world's leading experts, as well as my own insights. Join me as we accelerate the transition to cleaner, safer and smarter vehicles and grow the industry around the world. On today's show, we've got a really interesting episode, which is a bit different to our normal topic area. So in the past, we've been deep diving on electric vehicle powertrain technology, and I've often talked about autonomous vehicles and my kind of interest in that space as well. And I've been really lucky to line up, I think, someone who's been involved in that space for a really long time, one of the leaders, so Robbert Lohman, who works for a company called 2getthere, who are a developer and provider of automated autonomous transit systems, which is a really exciting topic. So welcome to the show, Robbert. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
So would you just like to start, as has kind of become traditional on these interviews, just by giving us a bit of background to yourself, Robbert, and explaining where you're from?
Yes. So I'm very Dutch. And that's always important to start off with, because we're a country around the world known as, well, let's say everybody finds us really blunt, while we ourselves find ourselves very direct and straightforward. Mm-hmm. So having given that introduction, it also gives me the right to speak my mind today.
Good.
And I've been involved in this industry for over 20 years, joining the predecessor of 2getthere in 1999 as a marketing assistant. And within a couple of months being asked whether or not I could promote automated vehicles that carry passengers towards the market in the Netherlands. And from let's say a trip around the Netherlands to meet every city that could use a system like that in well, let's say early 2000 to where we are at today. I've filled roles of sales, project director, chief operations officer, and currently back in the role that I love most is chief commercial officer.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I mean, really long time. 20 years ago, were people thinking much about autonomous systems, or were you kind of greeted and thrown back out again when you were going around?
It was interesting. Everybody loved the idea. So you're always welcome to give your pitch. And then ultimately, when it came to making decisions, nobody wanted to be the first. And even when somebody was the first, nobody wanted to be second. So you see an interesting trend there. And it's not about generating interest, because there's always interest in innovation. It's about creating a viable business case with the innovation that actually makes it sensible for cities to proceed with steps to actually procure, install, and operate a system like that.
I guess a lot has changed in 20 years with the sort of underlying technology, the vehicles themselves and the kind of navigation systems, capabilities, and all that. And were there was it more challenging in the early days from a technical point of view?
There's that depends on how you look at it. So in the early days, the focus was very much on a passenger system that would use a dedicated lane and deliver a certain capacity from A to B. Right. But at that time, automated vehicles or autonomous vehicles driving on rubber tires were still exceptional, so it wasn't normal yet. Which means that in the early days we went to conferences that were for automated people movers, which are the typical systems you see at airports, heavy traditional style rail guided vehicles. And when we were at those conferences, we were a little bit frowned upon because we were the guys that were doing the odd stuff, operating at grade, having at grade intersections with other traffic. It was different. And I asked people, if we're not an automated people, what are we? And they said, we don't know, but you're certainly not an automated people mover. And it's only when the Society of Automotive Engineers came up with levels 0 through 5 that all of a sudden the whole world said, hey, that's what you are. You are level 4 autonomous vehicle. And we said, okay, we'll take it. And it put us in a certain segment within the market. However, that did mean that all of a sudden the focus was very much on mixed traffic and the ability to operate amongst other traffic. Well, prior to that date, we had been focusing on creating transport capacities by having our own dedicated bus lane, if you will.
Right.
So the capabilities and the technology have changed significantly, because where previously you only needed to look out on what might be on the guideway in front of you to make sure that you would stop in time, now all of a sudden you have to look all around the vehicle, take all these actions that people can make into account, and be able to make a smart decision on depending on what's happening.
Okay, right.
And to be honest, that's the biggest trick that nobody has fully conquered yet, because we as people have the tremendous ability to do stupid things.
Yeah, to do the unexpected. It's what makes us humans.
Exactly. A predictable environment is the easiest for automation. And as soon as the predictability is gone, automation is going to have its challenges, because you get all these edge cases or exceptional situations that you need to prepare for.
And you're in initially, then you installed some systems running on these guideways.
I believe that we will be doing that even in the future. So the very first application that we delivered with an autonomous shuttle on a dedicated guideway was in 1997 at Schiphol Airport. Second pilot project was installed in 1999 at Business Park Rivium in the Netherlands. And especially the latter is an interesting case, because that first generation operated over a length of approximately 1 kilometer between 1999 and 2001. At that time, the city said, and the operating company Connection, which is part of Transdev, said, listen, this is a great way of driving. We want to go for a second generation, and we want to extend the route. So that application actually operated between late 2005, early 2006 till 2019 with the second generation vehicles, 6 vehicles that all clocked up to 300,000 kilometers each, carrying about 2,500 passengers per day.
Wow.
And is now undergoing a renewal for the third generation. And the third generation actually has a further extension in it, which will go into mixed traffic and will use the Dutch experimentation law for autonomous vehicles to be certified to actually operate without safety steward on board, and should be delivered sometime in 2021.
Oh, wow. So will that system then, Rivium, that will run partly in a guideway and partly in mixed traffic?
Yeah. And the main difference that we see is mixed traffic is all nice, especially in situations where the capacity of the current roads is not completely utilized yet. Because if the roads are at capacity and you add autonomous vehicles, the autonomous vehicles are going to be in the same traffic jam as all the manually driven vehicles are.
Yeah.
So autonomous vehicles can provide a great value to passengers, but what you need to think about is how fast is the vehicle going to be? And in mixed traffic, any autonomous vehicle is going to be the most courteous driver there ever is. So you're going to be as fast as the slowest other road user, which means that if there's a pedestrian in front of you or a bicyclist, you're not going to be going faster than he or she is, which means that you really have to think about what's the added value that you're providing for your passenger. And is your passenger actually willing to pay for that? And are those payments going to be sufficient to earn back the investment in the autonomous vehicles? So the business case should be the starting point instead of the final point, where most of these systems are now being brought to market as technology push, and just showing that we can do the trick. Well, frankly, we've been showing that we can do the trick since 1997, so we're a little bit past that point.
And do you see then, if you're able to operate on a guideway and in a mixed traffic environment, are you close, do you think, to being able to sort of replace conventional transit bus, passenger bus type services with, services with a driver, with an autonomous shuttle service instead?
So I think it's actually very rare that we will replace a bus.
Okay.
To be honest, a bus is a tremendous way to carry passengers along a certain corridor towards a city center. The disadvantage of a bus is that if you want to have good access to the bus, you have to have frequent stops. And that slows down the average speed of the bus, making it less attractive to use. So our type of systems are really first and last mile systems, where we are connecting stations of the metro or stations of the bus systems to their nearby surroundings, increasing the ridership of these systems. So really, we are trying to make public transit more attractive and a better alternative to using the private car.
Right. Okay. So yeah, that first mile, last mile. I guess, is that? I mean, that's a huge market, getting the first mile, last mile, and potentially then driving more people onto the sort of mass transit systems like rail. Which I don't know. I always say that you would have an excellent rail system in the Netherlands, but I know most Dutch people think you don't have an excellent rail system. But compared to us in the UK, you've got a good rail system.
It's usually what you're closest to, you are the most critical of, and the Dutch people are not only known for being very outspoken. They're I think the saying in most countries is a day where you have not laughed is a day you have not lived. Sometimes I think of the Dutch, it's a day where you have not complained is a day you have not lived. So we're very good at being very critical about what we have. I certainly think that the Dutch rail system is a very good system. Still, we always find ways to compare it to the better punctuality that there is in countries like Singapore and Japan. So there's always somewhere where the sun is just a little bit brighter. But I do think in the Netherlands in general, we shouldn't complain too much.
Yeah. No, it's great. I remember the first time I suggested to a Dutch guy that you guys had a fantastic rail system. I can remember the look on his face now. He was quite shocked, but no, I still genuinely believe that. So now, to make that transition from the guideway vehicles to mixed traffic, I mean, you said yourself they're more complicated. You've got more sensors and software and things. Are you guys developing that yourself within the business, or are you pulling that capability in from outside?
So the system as a whole is our development. When it comes to individual products or sensory systems or software systems, it's a mix of in-house development and externally sourced products. Right. So for the sensory systems, those are usually products that we get from the market, where the interfaces or sometimes even the software interpreting what the sensory systems see is an in-house development. We're in the fortunate position that in March of 2019, 2getthere was acquired by ZF. ZF is certainly not a small player in the market, and they're very aggressively developing electric-driven vehicles and autonomous capabilities. So we're now in the fortunate position that for a lot of the developments that are necessary for these type of vehicles, we have in-house solutions and in-house suppliers.
Right. Oh, wow. That's I knew ZF made some big statements was fairly recently, the back end of last year or the middle of last year, about developing autonomous. I think most people listening to the podcast would know who ZF are, but just in case people don't, ZF is a massive tier one automotive supplier. They make a lot of the bits that make your cars work. So, if anyone's driven one of the wonderful automatic BMW or Mercedes or Jaguar cars, that's a ZF transmission. So particularly famous for their transmissions and gearboxes in higher performing vehicles and commercial vehicles as well. So very very big in the bus market, supplying gearboxes and such like for normal buses. So it's interesting seeing them kind of get into this technology space. Does that mean then you're using a full suite of sensors? You have LiDAR, I guess, on the new vehicles.
We already had LiDAR on the vehicles that we were doing in 1997. So yeah, LiDAR is still part. LiDAR is still part of the equation, but now the vehicles are equipped with LiDAR, ultrasonics, radar, and high definition cameras.
Okay, so you really do have the full complement of sensors. Do you think there's going to be any unification on that in the future? We're seeing some people talk about moving down to basically getting rid of LiDAR, being able to run autonomously without LiDAR. Do you?
Well, it's from what I understand, and I'm a commercial guy, right? So I'm not a technical guy. So always be very careful on how far you trust me. But the argument that we talk about internally a lot is it's very attractive to get rid of LiDAR because LiDAR is an expensive element. And right now, getting towards certification is not possible yet with a LiDAR system on board, where it is possible with radar. And radar is relatively more affordable. However, what you see in the market currently is that LiDAR is the default that all the major systems still rely on. So what we've done internally is we set out a very dedicated, technology roadmap, where the LiDAR systems and the radar systems are being developed next to each other, where we're using the attributes of each system that best suits the needs of the application. And once the technologies mature and the safety evidence that we need to provide to be able to certify these systems also becomes available, then you can think about either retaining just one or dropping one of the other sensory systems that you have on the vehicle.
Right. Okay. So very much you're keeping abreast of what's happening there. I think that there's some really interesting things coming with sensors and particularly with the vision systems and cameras and what people are doing there. It's really interesting. So
we always keep in tune with what the market is doing, and when there is new technologies, we're very interested in doing assessments of them and basically benchmarking them against our current performance. Because there's one thing that's highly crucial if you're in public transit, and everybody that deals with public transit knows one thing, that if the weather is not good, people want to get in. If it's sunny day weather, people might actually walk, take a bike, or anything else. But to make sure that your public transit system still operates even when it rains is absolutely crucial. You can't sell to your passengers, oh, sorry, it rains, we're not operating the autonomous vehicle today. So the reliability and availability of these systems is absolutely critical in making a financially viable business case.
Yeah, and I guess because of the nature, I mean, the number of programs that you've got now and different locations, you must have that ability to run in all kind of different weather conditions. Is there anything that stops your vehicles, or do they keep trugging away through pretty much everything?
Well, fortunately, we can still operate in fog. We can still operate in rain, but obviously, there's always extreme weather conditions that will halt your vehicle. So wind, I think we go up to a scale of 7 or 8 on the scale of Beaufort, and then if it exceeds that, then it becomes a little bit too much for the vehicle. So we do operate in a normal mode and a degraded mode. So it means that when we reach a certain threshold, we'll adapt the vehicle behavior to suit the climatic circumstances. Best example is snow and ice. If there's snow and ice conditions, the acceleration, deceleration, and the top speed of the vehicles will be adjusted to what is normal for a rubber-tired vehicle, just like you as a driver would do in your car. You're taking the circumstances of the road into account. So those kind of measures are all present within the system to make sure that we can continue to provide transportation as long as possible, but do take into account the circumstances that we're facing.
Okay, that's really interesting. And a connected question, I've heard that sensor cleaning can be a bit of a challenge in some of these vehicles and some different applications. Do you have you got a special solution for sensor cleaning, or is there kind of is that a challenge for you as well?
No, there's procedures for the maintenance staff to do visual inspections and checks. What is different is that, and obviously this being a podcast and being a little bit less visual, so I'm not sure everybody has a picture of our vehicle, but if they don't, I encourage you to look at pictures of our vehicles online, is that our sensors are not mounted on the body, but they're actually present within the body, and we have openings in the bumpers on through which they look outside. So they're actually shielded from the environment, and we don't have the ability to directly get rain on the sensor. So that helps tremendously in that regard. In addition, what we do is we use this sensors fail safe. So our vehicles are continuously planning to stop within the horizon of what they're looking out for, unless they don't see anything. So they scan the area in front of the vehicle or around the vehicle empty. If we don't see anything, we're allowed to continue to drive. If we are unable to look because there is something on the sensor, we're automatically stopping.
Right. Yeah. Okay. It's interesting, and that's being able to make sure that you can always see where you're going. I mean, that's the real kind of key thing about getting autonomous systems up and running. I meant to just say I'll put some links in the show notes to your website, so people can, if you're interested in what the vehicles look like, if you go down to the show notes below, I'll put some links in so you can click through to them. Very nice looking, very sort of sleek looking autonomous pods. Look a bit like something out of a science fiction movie, maybe from the future.
Yeah. And I have to give credit here to our CEO, because when we first started with our smaller vehicle, the PRT vehicle that's operational since 2010 in Abu Dhabi at Masdar City, we had a CEO that said at the time of the design, he said, forget form follows function. It's the form that's really important, and we'll just have to make sure that all the components fit within the space that the design allows for. So since that time, we reached out to 2getthere, one of the key designers in Italy, for famous car designers in Italy.
Yeah.
And they designed both our small vehicle, the PRT vehicle, and our larger vehicle, the GRT vehicle. Yeah. We have a family look and feel made by a designer that actually knows what he does. So I do believe that we have the best looking vehicle in the market.
I'd be inclined to agree. It's very. I just had a look at the PRT. Actually, I hadn't seen that until just now. It's very, very sleek looking vehicle. And sometimes with these projects, I think particularly where you have maybe. Almost pains me to say this, being an engineer myself, but too many engineers in the room. They forget about things having to look right, and sometimes with some of the other products out there doing these kind of things, they kind of end up looking a bit weird and not very aesthetically pleasing, and that can be a bit of a barrier to for people getting excited about these systems in themselves. If you've got vehicles that don't kind of look don't look right, but yours definitely look right.
Well, that's one of the things we learned throughout all the generations of the automated products that we did. It's about balance issue in your team. So if you have a very strong characters or a over representation of a certain kind of engineer, it means that the issues that you'll face during the development will be solved by the person or the people that are most present within your team. So the balance within your team to make sure that problems get addressed in the right area instead of the area where the most dominant people are is absolutely essential. Which means a mechanical issue should not be solved in software and the other way around.
Yeah, no, I agree definitely. So whereabouts you've mentioned a couple of the places where we'll find to get their vehicles running now. Where do you have vehicles in operation?
So the nicest location to come and look after the summer when it's up and running is the third generation at Rivian Business Park, which is in the city of Capelle aan de IJssel, just I would say what is it east of Rotterdam in the Netherlands. We're also installing a project at Brussels Airport in Belgium. The vehicles are operational at Master City in Abu Dhabi. There is a vehicle that will be operational in Singapore also by summertime. And there is a vehicle that will be operational at a test site in Orlando in the US by summer. In addition, there's a couple of projects that are, let's say, on the brink of signing, which means that the lead time to delivery of a project is anywhere between 18 months to 3 years, depending on the size of the project, meaning that they might be coming to a location near you.
Yeah, great. And do you see a big kind of shift in the market? Is there more appetite now for deploying vehicles like this and systems like this in the market?
There's a great interest, and we make a distinction between what we call demonstrations, or and on the other hand, a proof of concept or a permanent application. So you see that over the past probably 4 to 5 years, there have been a lot of demonstrations, which means that people are deploying 1 or 2 vehicles for anywhere from 3 months to 2 years to carry a very limited amount of passengers and create enthusiasm about what autonomous vehicles are. And obviously these demonstrations are being done to try to convince decision makers that autonomous vehicles are ready and that it should be a full-time project that should be implemented. What unfortunately doesn't happen too often, because demonstrations usually show vehicles still at a relatively limited speed with a steward on board, which basically communicates to decision makers that the vehicles are not ready yet for deployment. What we prefer is an approach like De Lijn did in Belgium for Brussels Airport, where they said, okay, we have an application that we think creates an interesting business case, but we want the technical risk of the implementation mitigated through a proof of concept. So you need to demonstrate to us through the proof of concept that the system actually works under the circumstances that are here and against the requirements that we've set. And if you pass the proof of concept, it triggers the deployment of the system, which is a really interesting way for us to work, because it means that you are doing a demonstration of some sort, calling it a proof of concept. But if you complete that, you control your own faith in being able to roll out the complete system. So I'm as a company, 2getthere is being a little bit stubborn in the sense that we're not really interested in demonstrations, even though we do them sometimes. But we're specifically interested in talking to cities about, how can we use the experience that we built over the past 20 years to actually roll out these systems in a permanent fashion with a financially viable business case where people can rely on them day in, day out.
Yeah, I guess you're at that point now where you've been doing it for 20 years and you don't really need to prove that it can work. You can show lots of case studies and examples and videos and analysis. It's kind of getting into the kind of practical commercial deployment. And I noticed you've talked a lot about passengers. Are there other applications where you have deployed vehicles for moving other stuff? So
So if you look way back, we are a spin out of a company that used to be called Frog AGV Systems, and AGV is an acronym for Automated Guided Vehicles.
right.
That company was started in 1984, and automated guided vehicles were being used to move goods in warehouses. Anything from plastic injection molding to CDs to steel coils were being moved around. That company still exists. It's been taken over by Oceaneering, so it's now called Oceaneering AGV Systems. Still very active in the industrial market. In addition, Oceaneering also uses the technology for ride systems. So if you go to the website of Oceaneering and look up entertainment systems, you'll find ride vehicles that are basically based on the same guidance technology as we use in our vehicles. The technology has also been used in port environments. So the automated container terminals that are delivered around the world basically also use the same principle that we use. So the Europe Combined Terminal, ECT terminal in the port of Rotterdam has 370 automated guided vehicles that use the same basic automation technology that our vehicles use.
Okay, so for moving containers around inside the port? Is that...
Yeah. So between what they call the key cranes and the stacking area, there's flatbed vehicles driving back and forth, moving the containers.
Oh wow, I didn't know that. That's a big application. And in the systems that you deploy now, are they kind of self-contained, or is there some sort of back-end like supervisory operating system? You know, can you sort of control and change the routes of the vehicles?
Yeah, the supervisory system is absolutely an essential element of any automated transit system. And I think this is a key difference between 2getthere and other suppliers in the market is there appears to be a very big focus on the vehicle, and we'll agree that the vehicle is the most visible aspect, why is one of the reasons why you pay so much time and attention to how it looks. But ultimately, the vehicle is just one part of the system, and the supervisory system might actually be more important to make sure that the system actually delivers the transit that is required by the passengers. So the operator that has the overview of the system needs to be able to see where vehicles are, what vehicles are doing, whether or not the performance of the vehicle is up to standard. All those kinds of elements need to be able to be checked. And in that supervisory system, it includes the routing, the dispatching, managing potentially conflicts between the routes of vehicles. So all that is present in the supervisory system.
Yeah.
We are currently in our third generation of that system, rolling that out towards the Rivian application. And have created that in such a way that it's has a distributed architecture, meaning that if in the future we need to roll it out over a city, and we can basically do handoffs between different sections, just like air traffic controllers do.
Okay, yeah, I think I've often wondered that about the operating system. I can imagine, like running a sort of small, maybe 2 or 3 vehicles is one thing, but the way some applications could easily go quite quickly at a city level or at a closed site like an airport, like Schiphol Airport, you could have all kinds of different automated vehicles from different vehicle manufacturers trying to sort of occupy the same space, and then they need some sort of back end. Or would be helpful to have some kind of back-end supervisory system that could operate or kind of coordinate all of those vehicles' activity.
Yeah, so our supervisory system is based on the supervisory system that we used to have in the industrial environment. Currently, we are in our third generation of the system for people moving applications, and it's been set up specifically to take into account that what you see now with autonomous vehicles, that it should be able to control a large fleet of autonomous vehicles. So where our previous deployments were 6, 10, 25 vehicles, the requirement for this application was specifically to be able to create or to be able to coordinate fleets in excess of 100, 500, 1,000 vehicles.
Wow, that would be quite something to imagine. We could get to that point where you've got 1,000 vehicle fleets operating in a city or in a different scenario.
We're looking forward to that as well.
Well, so here's a question for you: How far away do you think that is? Is that a couple of years off, or 5 years, or 10 years? Where do you think
that's going to be probably about 10 years off right now. We need to make the transition from the thinking of limited applications where people are thinking, oh, I might carry 100 people an hour from A to B, to actually allowing them to think about carrying 500 people an hour to 2,000 people an hour to perhaps 5,000 people an hour. Because aside from everything that we're going through now in normal life, where in Dutch you say 2getthere, which means we are herd, we are in the herd.
Yep.
And we all want to move to our work at the same time. Yeah. So it means that any transit system will have to accommodate a significant peak demand in the peak hour, in the rush hour. And outside of those hours, it's much less utilized.
Yeah, which is of course, always strikes me one of the problems that we have with conventional kind of bus systems is basically buses are very big. So you've got quite a large fixed capacity there. And even if you take vehicles off the road during off-peak times, you've still got normally quite large vehicles driving around half empty in those off-peak periods. And I guess the benefit of a large-scale autonomous system is it's much easier to flex that capacity in and out.
Yeah. Plus you have to deal with the drivers where you need 100% of your drivers in the peak hour, and you might only need 50% as soon as the peak hour ends.
Yeah, I know it's a big some potential to improve how we move around. So another question, I'm really fascinated by, your business model is very much focused on the kind of mass transit and integration with other modes of transport. What do you feel about the developments in the passenger vehicle space, so the sort of personal autonomous vehicle space? Is that going to be a threat to your business, or is that an advantage to your business? And what do you see happening there?
The answer is basically both, because anytime autonomous technologies are being developed for passenger vehicles, it means they come available at a large size and at a low price. So being able to integrate those developed components in our systems actually becomes more attractive and makes our systems more affordable. Yeah. At the same time, whether they're a threat or not completely depends on what city you're talking about. If you have a city that's let's say a smart city, so wants to accommodate transportation for all, and wants to get rid of the exhaust within in the city, and the crowdedness within the city. I think that those cities are going to be implementing more and more policies to restrict car use in the city center. We are often saying that increased mobility and increased accessibility of cities goes along with increased livability of cities, which actually means that there should be less vehicles in the city transporting more people. So shared usage is really critical to that. The idea of having personalized cars or having cars in cities, even electric and even autonomous, and bringing people right to the doors of their destination, to me doesn't make any sense at all, because it means that the amount of vehicles that are going into a city will only increase, making it even more difficult to cross a street or to get somewhere. And all this vehicular traffic is not going to improve our cities in the long run. So I firmly believe, and I think that's being recognized by smart cities as well, that good transit within cities is the future of the big cities around the world. I do believe in passenger cars on highways going from A to B, which is a very monotonous task where drivers easily become distracted. That all the advanced autonomous systems that can support the driving task or even take over that driving task completely will be introduced very soon. So automating a vehicle on a highway, which is a relatively predictable environment because you don't have any cross traffic, you don't have any major speed differences, you don't have let's say pedestrians and bikes accessing the interstate or the highway. I think you'll see autonomous vehicles there first.
Yeah, it's I often sort of wonder about that kind of thing, maybe then having an impact on things like long distance rail. You know, if someone could get into a car and have an almost autonomous journey from, you know, point A to point B, and this is more about between cities or from sort of towns to cities. But those longer distance journeys where you might have driven to a rail station, then got on a train and gone on the train and then got off the train and, you know, etc. It's quite a complex journey. Actually, the sort of simplicity of a single journey in a vehicle that's almost autonomous or is fully autonomous for the whole journey. I can imagine in a lot of people that might be a preferred option. And even if the peak speed of the vehicle was slower, you know, a train can go really fast and maybe a tired vehicle couldn't go as fast as a train, but because you don't have all the stops and the waiting and the changing between modes of transport, it could be quite an efficient journey as well. So I do wonder about how that will impact. Of course, there's a big thing, and there's a question in this with the cost of implementing, and in a lot of cases, you know, a metro system is really desirable in a modern city, but they're very, very, very expensive to implement, particularly underground metro systems. So, you know, kind of balancing out that really high capital cost against more, you know, alternate systems. I'm imagining that's part of the business case for your system.
Well, I mean, there's different ways to look at it, right? If you and I always I'm familiar with the example of the Paris metro. If you look what capacity and how many people are transported by one metro line, it would require, I think, the equivalent of 8 lanes of guideway side by side in each direction through the heart of Paris to match one metro line. Yeah. So we can say that metro lines are expensive, but at the same time, creating a 16-lane wide highway through the city center might not be cheap either. So in that regard, it's always pick your poison. And I think that what you mentioned with regards to the journey that people might prefer, yes, I can understand a single mode of operation that picks you up right in front of your door and drops you off right in front of where you need to be is the preferred option. I think in the long run, though, that option doesn't exist even in the car, because if you imagine that everybody would be using that car living outside the city center and coming to work in the city center, what that means in terms of the number of cars actually coming towards the city center, and after they drop the passengers off, those cars need to go and park somewhere, and everybody argues that autonomous cars will avoid the need for parking downtown. Unless they are going to be roaming around endlessly looking for passengers that are not there because it's not the peak hour anymore, it means that the cars need to park outside the city center. So instead of creating parking in the city center, we have created cars that need to go into the city in the morning, out of the city afterwards, and then at night need to come back in to pick you back up and then drive you home. I'm not sure if taking away all the parking in the city center is a good idea if we still insist on having that personal automobile. which means that ultimately, I think 10, 20 years down the road, you're not going to be able to park your car in front of your office anymore.
Yeah, I know. In a lot of cases, I think we have a particular view of the world from Europe, but then you go to Asia and it's quite a different perspective straight away. The way their cities operate, the size of the cities, the number of people trying to move around, so it's very different kind of transport needs. And also, it does feel like in general people are less in love with personal cars. Got just sort of anecdotal evidence of I've never known as many younger people who can't drive and just aren't interested in driving actually. So they're quite happy. Their lives are kind of based around cities, or they will get the train or the bus or the metro to get around, and that does seem to be more and more common than it used to be. I don't know if that's a similar experience in the Netherlands.
For me personally, the life-changing fact was having kids, where prior to kids, you were, let's say, relatively easy and lazy and would be using the car to go most places.
Yeah.
Once you have kids, they actually look at the world very differently. They enjoy bike rides a lot more, and they think the bus is the coolest thing in the world. So nowadays, when I go to the city center, there's no way I'm not going by the bus, because that's what my kids love to do the most.
Oh, that's fantastic. That is, of course, you mentioned bikes. So the Netherlands is famous for its fantastic cycleways and bike ridership. I always hear countries talk about wanting to replicate the success of the cycle networks in the Netherlands. Do you think it's possible in another country, or are you guys just, as well as being direct and brutal, you're also just addicted to your bikes?
Well, we're addicted to our bikes, but frankly, where there's a will is a way. So if there's countries that want to have the same cycle infrastructure as the Netherlands, I would strongly encourage them to do so. Biking is a healthy activity, and it's certainly not an activity that automated vehicles should take passengers away from. So if we design a system basically to compete with either walking or biking, we've done our job terribly wrong. So we're not there to steal passengers from buses. We're not there to decrease the number of bicyclists or the number of pedestrians. We're there to provide an alternative for the car.
Right. And are your vehicles capable of carrying bikes? Do they have some sort of provision to move bikes, or do you kind of rely on people leaving the bike at the pickup point?
So currently we haven't made specific provisions in the vehicle. There's sufficient space to get a bike on the vehicle. Whether or not that's allowed is something that we leave on to the operator of the system.
Right. It took me about 10 years of traveling to America to work out what the big beefy black metal structures were on the front of the buses.
And to me, that's puzzling, because you're doing the worst of both things. Because if you're bringing your bike, it actually takes more time to mount your bike to the front of the bus, therefore slowing the bus again in its journey towards its final destination and making it less attractive to use.
Yeah, they seem to be very rarely used. But almost every bus that you see in America has one on the front of it, which is a good idea, but it doesn't seem to get very well used at all.
No, I think the people in the Netherlands either use the small folding bikes that I see around being used, and I know there's other people that just have two bikes, one in the city where they live and one in the city where they work.
Oh, really? Okay, so you get the train in and pick up your town bike and ride on from the station to your workplace.
Yeah, it's what I did when I was at university. I would be going home for the weekends, and I had two bikes.
Well, you can never have enough bikes. That's definitely that's what I keep telling my wife anyway. I'm not sure.
It's a good excuse. Yes.
Yeah, I wouldn't leave one in the city, but yeah, no, it's very. We have different. In the UK, cycling's definitely, other than London. In London, it's very serious commuting. But outside of London, I would say it's quite unusual to commute on the bike. It's very much a recreational activity. But Netherlands just always seems fantastic in terms of cycle commuting. It really is
Yeah, I think for journeys up to 10 kilometers, it's in the Netherlands. It has a dominant market share, which is a good thing.
And you see so many kids going to school that way as well, which must just be a fantastic way for them to start the day as well, and good for their health and fitness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So in terms of the business, then you said there's a lot of interest at the moment. What's the what's coming that's really exciting? What's the next kind of big programs that you're going to see? We're going to see your vehicles going out there with.
So we're absolutely excited about the first mixed traffic applications. Those are already under contract. At the same time, we're working on our first, public-private partnership to deliver a system, which is exciting. And there's, let's say, hopefully Corona doesn't delay us too much, but towards the end of this year, early next year, we hope to have the first contracts in place for applications in the US and in Asia, which would be an exciting next step to make as well.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. And are you doing things in the future looking at other sort of applications like other service vehicles and things like that, or are you going to stay very focused on the passenger transport?
Right now, our focus is completely with passenger transport. So yes, there's appeal, and every once in a while, especially on Friday afternoons, where we're having a small get-together, we think about and dream about what else could we do. Yeah. But those are not serious development efforts that are being undertaken within the company at this time.
Yeah, okay. And so my last question, because I think we're actually over time, but it's been so interesting. So hope you can forgive me, hopefully. What if you could change one thing in terms of getting more deployments of your kind of technology out there? What do you think that one change would be?
Oh, wow. To get better information to cities to make sure that they make a more informed decision on where these systems are installed already. So instead of all these cities around the world focusing on demonstrations and showing off, actually making sure that they have good knowledge on what type of system can be operated with an economically viable business case today, to make sure that the introduction of these type of systems goes a lot quicker than it has been going.
Great. Well, hopefully this podcast could be a starting point for some of that information gathering, and I guess they'll have to make a beeline for you guys. It's been really interesting. I feel like, to be honest, there's more questions popped into my head than we've had time to go through. So we may end up coming back to this down the line, but that's been really fascinating, Robert. Thank you so much for taking the time out to do that.
No problem. I guess it all depends on how your listeners actually react to the podcast. And if you get no reactions, or you get only reactions about what this guy from the Netherlands was saying, I guess that there's no sequel to this meeting. But otherwise, I'm more than open to have another discussion.
Brilliant. Okay. Thank you. So that's all we've got time for in today's episode. That was a fantastic discussion with Robert. I learned so much about 2getthere and about their business model, and what's coming for them in the connected and autonomous vehicle space. I think their business model is really interesting, using the AVs for last mile, and like Robert said, they're now moving into that being in mixed traffic. So that's a big step forward for them. I think obviously there's lots of other AV developments coming across the space, so be really interesting. We've got a couple more people lined up to talk to in that area in the next few months. So really, really good discussion with Robert there. I wish 2getthere all the best in the future, and hopefully we might get to talk to him again soon. So if you enjoyed that and got some value out of that, please don't forget to hit like, leave us a rating below, share this podcast with your friends. We've got lots more really fantastic episodes coming. We've got some really great expert speakers lined up for the next couple of weeks. So that's all we've got time for today, and I really do look forward to speaking to you again soon.